Good evening, everyone. My name is Claudia Stokes, and I am a professor in the English department here at Trinity University. It is my pleasure to welcome you to tonight's event on behalf of the Trinity University Humanities Collective, an interdisciplinary organization that fosters humanistic learning and enables meaningful action through programming that supports the scholarship of humanities faculty and students, engages partners on campus and in the community to advance the public humanities, and calls attention to the relevance of the humanities in contemporary society. If you don't already, we encourage you to follow the collective on social media at HumanitiesTU. I would like to thank the leaders of the Humanities Collective, Ruben Dubertuy, Tim O'Sullivan, and Catherine Santos, for all of their work organizing tonight's event, and I offer my very special thanks to Heather Eichling for all of her careful, detailed work. And it is a special pleasure for me to introduce this evening's speaker, Dr. Koritha Mitchell. Dr. Mitchell is Associate Professor of English at The Ohio State University, where she has taught since 2005. Dr. Mitchell is the author of several books, including Living with Lynching, African American Lynching Plays, Performance and Citizenship, 1890 to 1930, which was published by the University of Illinois Press in 2011, and which received prizes from the American Theater and Drama Society, as well as the Society for the Study of American Women Writers. She is also the editor of an important new scholarly edition of Frances Harper's 1892 novel, Iola Leroy, and her new book, From Slave Cabins to the White House, Homemade Citizenship in African American Culture, was just published by the University of Illinois Press. In recent years, Dr. Mitchell has become one of the foremost public critics of race and white supremacy, and she has appeared as a commentator in such outlets as CNN, Good Morning America, NBC News, PBS NewsHour, and NPR's Morning Edition. Dr. Mitchell's lecture will be followed by a question and answer session moderated by my colleague, Dr. Catherine Santos, co-director of the Humanities Collective. We encourage you to submit your questions during the lecture in the designated Q&A box by clicking on the Q&A icon you see at the bottom of the Zoom window. Dr. Mitchell's talk this evening is titled Homemade Citizenship, All But Inviting Injury. Dr. Mitchell, thank you for joining us and welcome virtually to Trinity.
Thank you so much. I want to begin with a land acknowledgement. This image is the Great Circle Earthworks in what we call Newark, Ohio. And the photo credit goes to Ohio State University's American Indian Studies program. And I share this with you, but I hope that you'll mostly listen to what I have to say. I want to begin by acknowledging that I come to you from the unceded traditional lands of sovereign nations, the Shawnee, the Miami, the Lenape, the Wyandot. I acknowledge these sovereign peoples as the past, present, and future caretakers of these lands. Indigenous peoples and indigenous cultures have not disappeared, and despite relentless violence, including violent dispossession, the people who cultivated these lands with care and reverence continue to model life-giving practices while facing forces driven by greed and perfectly comfortable with destruction. The water protectors are just one example. In 1619, long after Native peoples were on these lands, a pirate ship traded 20 and odd Negroes to the financially struggling British colony of Virginia. 2019 marked 400 years since that fateful exchange. And today I acknowledge that the descendants of those 20 and odd Negroes are still working to make the United States live up to its claim of being a democracy. I acknowledge, too, how African Americans' assertions of US citizenship translate into participation in settler colonialism. I make these acknowledgments because US education so often encourages an erasure of these truths, an erasure that is always violent, no matter how religiously we look away from the blood on our own hands. May we all consider the many ways that each of us can make every space we enter less hostile for more people. May we all consider the many ways that each of us can make every space we enter less hostile for more people. Thank you so much for joining me for Homemade Citizenship, All But Inviting Injury. As you know from the introduction, my name is Koritha Mitchell and I use she, her pronouns. You can follow me on Twitter at Prof. Corey, and you can find out all kinds of information about me at korithamitchell.com. I am so grateful to be able to share these ideas with you tonight, and special thanks goes to Heather Eichling for making this possible. We actually started this journey back in January, and of course, all kinds of unforeseen things have happened so that I couldn't be in San Antonio in April, but instead we're doing this now in September. But I'm just so grateful that all of the people involved stuck it out and, just were so committed to making sure that we could have this time to engage these ideas. So many thanks to Dr. Ruben DePertuis, Dr. Katie Santos. Many thanks to Dr. Claudia Stokes for the introduction and just for being a colleague that I've gotten to know throughout the years in organizations like C19. Also, many thanks to Dr. Luis Martinez, who is a Ford Fellow, and though he's in chemistry and the director of the Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurship in totally different fields from me, has really been a force of welcome into this intellectual community as we've gotten ready for this event. So I just feel like I have a sense of how rich the intellectual community of Trinity University and also of San Antonio more broadly is. I've also felt very welcomed by San Antonio African American Community Archive and Museum. And the last thing I want to say, sort of as a preliminary remark, is that I've been struck by Trinity University alumni who have reached out to me and said, "Oh, I'm really delighted to see that you're giving a talk for Trinity. I remember when I was a student there, how good of a job they did at bringing speakers whose presentations remain with me to this day." So my impression of the intellectual community of Trinity University, as well as San Antonio more broadly, is really exciting to me, and it makes me feel incredibly honored to share these ideas with you tonight. So thank you so much for making time to be here to engage these ideas. I'm really aware of time, so let me launch right in. Today, I will argue that rigorously interpreting Black expressive culture requires reading through the lens of achievement. It requires turning away from what we've been taught to do, which is approach Black history and art looking for protest, looking for resistance. A reading practice attuned to success emerges from acknowledging a key truth. From enslavement onward, Black accomplishment has been discouraged. Americans have always continued to strive, no matter how often they must adjust their conception of what constitutes achievement. They are relentlessly attacked while marching toward accomplishment. But African Americans never take their eyes off the prize, and they sustain each other in that singular focus by participating in a community conversation that defines and redefines Black success. In fact, I contend that African American culture is best understood as an ongoing, multivalent conversation about success that produces homemade citizenship. Denied basic ingredients like safety from the land of their birth, African Americans create success and citizenship from scratch. This is how I will proceed. First, I will explain what I call know your place aggression by showing how I came to appreciate it and by briefly illustrating its ubiquity. Then, because I believe recognition of know your place aggression encourages a reading practice attuned to achievement, I will demonstrate what this reading practice yields when applied to a canonical text by an African American woman. A fierce orientation toward success shapes Black cultural practices, but this fact has been overlooked because most Americans refuse to acknowledge what actually structures experience in the United States. That structuring mechanism is what I call know your place aggression. I define know your place aggression as the flexible, dynamic array of forces that answer the achievements of marginalized groups such that their success brings aggression as often as praise. Americans celebrate white men's accomplishments, but any progress by those who are not straight, white, and male is answered with a backlash of violence, both literal and symbolic, both physical and discursive, that essentially says, know your place. I learned that certain people's success inspires hostility and that African Americans have long understood this pattern by writing my first book, Living with Lynching. Black author plays about lynching show that mobs most often targeted Black men, not because they were criminals, but because they were successful heads of household in traditional nuclear families. Black men of achievement were the ones who had forgotten their proper place in American society, so their deaths served as a warning to survivors. Know your place. Black authored lynching plays spotlight stable African American families and show how mobs attack their success while insisting it never existed. Insisting, in fact, that Black communities are full of criminals, specifically Black rapists who target white women. Casting African Americans, regardless of their behavior, as rapacious, sexually irresponsible, or uninterested in domestic stability amounts to discursive violence. And whether it is physical or discursive, violence has one purpose: to mark who belongs and who does not. Violence is a way of reminding targets of their proper place, a way of insisting that certain people should not feel secure in claiming space and resources. In other words, violence is a performance of the denial of citizenship, an active rejection of the idea that one belongs. Once pioneering playwrights taught me that African Americans were most often lynched for their success, I began noticing the country's commitment to know your place aggression. Homemaking has long defined who is and is not a citizen. So the traditional domestic success of those who are not straight, white, and male is routinely attacked. Michelle Obama's experiences provide many examples, such as when Fox News called her a baby mama. Besides being a Princeton and Harvard educated lawyer, she was pursuing First Lady status, complete with well behaved children and an affectionate husband. To call her a baby mama is to associate her with a caricature of an uneducated woman of a lower socioeconomic class and with a domestic image that does not involve being publicly claimed by a man of stature. Recasting a Black wife and mother as a baby mama puts her in her proper place. Black women can be house slaves and housekeepers, but not homemakers. Hostility toward Michelle Obama's domestic success took many forms, though. While she embodied the role of mom in chief with dignity and grace, her husband was disrespected, denigrated, and sometimes lynched. A state representative shouted, "You lie," while Obama addressed Congress in 2009, and a governor shoved her finger in the commander in chief's face. More tellingly, as Ronald Kessler reports in his book, In the President's Secret Service, once Obama became president, the Secret Service experienced a 400% increase in the number of threats in comparison to President Bush. Also, depictions of a lynched Barack Obama circulate on the internet and have received likes on Facebook. You might remember that in 2008, his campaign was all about hope, so it was made into rope. And this image remains easily accessible online, including in high resolution versions that are proper for making printouts, right? So magazines or flyers. And of course, some of those images included life-size dummies made to resemble Obama, like this one. But these are not even the most striking examples. For me, the most revealing emerged after Clint Eastwood's empty chair routine at the 2012 Republican National Convention. Eastwood had pretended to be speaking to President Obama as he chastised an empty chair. And the next day, an empty chair hung from a noose in the front yard of a middle-class neighborhood near Austin, Texas. Could the message be any clearer? You may be president of the United States of America, but you're still, Americans will not only ask to see your papers, your birth certificate, transcripts, some will relish the idea of seeing you in a noose. Barack and Michelle Obama embody exactly what Americans claim to respect, including an investment in the heteronormative nuclear family. And I'll just say that I use that term a lot, heteronormative nuclear family, and it simply refers to what Americans claim they respect and what they claim middle-class white America represents, regardless of what the reality is, right? So a breadwinning husband who has financially dependent wife and children. That's what I mean by heteronormative nuclear family. So Barack and Michelle Obama embody exactly what Americans claim to respect, including an investment in the heteronormative nuclear family. Yet American words and deeds seek to remind them and people like them of their proper place. Because African Americans have long recognized this tendency, Black literature and art acknowledge racist violence, but not primarily to protest. African Americans simply affirm themselves at the same time that they note that the resulting success will attract hostility. Like the characters in lynching plays, African Americans live their lives and tell their truths. And when they seem to be enjoying too much success or acting like they believe they belong, they receive a reminder, like this one, of their proper place. Because, of course, this empty chair hanging from a noose is not a message simply for the Obamas. Know Your Place aggression is the context in which my new book examines Black cultural production from the Civil War to the present. I view artistic works as contributions to the community conversation that defines, affirms, and fuels Black success in a nation hostile to it. And because expressive culture is an access point to a broader community conversation, focusing on women's cultural production offers particular rewards. Because the accomplishments of marginalized groups inspire attacks, Black women's texts illuminate strategies of perseverance at the intersection of both racist and sexist violence, at the intersection of aggression designed to keep both African Americans and women in their proper place. As Kimberly Crenshaw teaches, when one attends to those hounded by more than one form of oppression, the findings shed light on the experiences of those who live at intersections with less traffic. So I believe Black women's works will be more revealing than men's for understanding how African Americans as a broader group cultivate homemade citizenship. And I'll just pause to admit to you that I could have done a study that focuses on queer intimacies and alternative domesticities. And my examples today will very much focus on the heteronormative nuclear family, but I'm more than happy to talk about how queer intimacies, for example, fit into my thinking about homemade citizenship. But while I'm talking about the text examined, I also want to pause and share the book's table of contents. And I do this simply to be clear about the shape of the entire study. I don't want this to distract from the more localized points that I'll be making tonight. So please consider this just an interlude and know that I will put the complete table of contents back up at the end. So no need to worry about writing these texts down or anything. So, from slave cabins to the White House, homemade citizenship in African American culture begins with an introduction: house slaves, housekeepers, homemakers. And in chapter one, A Home of One's Own, I examined Harriet Jacobs' Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl and Elizabeth Keckley's Behind the Scenes, or 30 Years a Slave and 4 Years in the White House. And of course, that's reflecting the fact that Elizabeth Keckley was the dressmaker to Abraham Lincoln's wife. So in that one chapter, we move from slave cabins to the White House. Chapter two, No Really, A Home of One's Own, looks at Black domestic novels, Frances Harper's Iola Leroy and Pauline Hopkins' Contending Forces. Chapter three, we get to New Negroes, New Homes, Nella Larson's Quicksand, and Zora Neale Hurston's Their Eyes Were Watching God. In chapter four, I look at major dramas. So, Home as Human Right and Black Power, looking at Lorraine Hansberry's A Raisin in the Sun, which is often affiliated with the civil rights movement, and Alice Childress's Wine in the Wilderness, which is clearly in conversation with the Black Power movement. Chapter five and six move us again from slave cabins to the White House. Chapter five, Still the Master's House. I'm looking at texts that look back at slavery, Octavia Butler's Kindred and Toni Morrison's Beloved. And then in chapter six, The Ultimate Home, Michelle Obama in the White House, I examine Michelle Obama's public persona as First Lady as a performance text, which means that I look seriously at her decisions about how to wear her hair, her clothes, her bodily presentation, and also her decisions about how to decorate the White House. Because my study uses cultural production as an access point to the community conversation that sustains Black people in the midst of American violence, those who are both artists and critics prove to be especially powerful guides. Poet and scholar Evie Shockley helps me identify homemade citizenship as the result of practices of self affirmation in the midst of grappling with hostility. Her description of academia applies much more broadly. I am neither homeless nor at home in the academy. Rather, I am making myself at home. Making myself at home is both a state of being and a process in which I am continuously engaged. I am doing what I can to make the place where I find myself feel like a home for myself and for my students by acting like, not pretending, but behaving as if the academy is ours. We've been invited in. The situation is often hospitable, but you don't have to be invited into your own home. Because Black presence in the United States has been shaped by kidnapping and 250 years of slavery, this is not quite home. So, Black people are always making themselves at home. What they can grasp is not quite citizenship, so they are always making citizenship from scratch. In my study, then, making oneself at home means pursuing success while acknowledging that one does so in an environment that answers one's achievements with violence. Members of African American communities have made themselves at home without ceasing, even though Black agency is often, in the words of Sadia Hartman, limited and transient. As Hartman explains, African American community relations cannot be appreciated when one overlooks the losses engendered by slavery and its afterlives. These relations can neither be reduced to domination nor explained outside of it. However, acknowledging know your place aggression highlights the fact that it is not just African American agency that is limited and transient, so too is domination. Domination does not simply endure, it keeps reacting to every sign of Black success and every assertion of Black belonging. Examining Black culture through the lens of achievement is incredibly generative. Such a reading practice illuminates, in the words of Cyan Nye, the predicaments posed by a general state of obstructed agency with respect to other human actors and to the social. Understanding how routinely Black success inspires aggression from the nation it helped build allows readers to appreciate the perseverance of Black communities. African Americans grapple with what Nye calls obstructed agency, in that their ability to overcome obstacles and meet or exceed standards brings violence as often as praise. And what I want us to understand is that they pursue success very well knowing that. In the time that I have left, I'm going to use a literary example to show you what it looks like to read through the lens of achievement and to identify practices of making oneself at home. Harriet Jacobs' Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl is a novelized autobiography in which the author presents herself as Linda Brent, and these are among its concluding words. Reader, my story ends with freedom, not in the usual way with marriage. I and my children are now free. However, the dream of my life is not yet realized. I do not sit with my children in a home of my own. I still long for a hearthstone of my own, however humble. I wish it for my children's sake far more than for mine. As she both maximizes and challenges the conventions of sentimental romance, Jacobs defines success more in terms of freedom than marriage. However, freedom is not truly satisfying without a home of her own. It is therefore revealing to examine the text for its drive toward achievement and for how often Linda defines accomplishment in relation to home building. Though the concluding passage downplays her individual domestic desire by emphasizing her children, the narrative focus on domesticity exposes how relentlessly Linda defines, redefines, and pursues success while taking note of white violence. Jacobs frames Linda's life story by highlighting know your place aggression, noting that white Americans are aware that the enslaved succeed in maintaining dignity. So they deliberately try to brutalize that dignity out of them. When Linda's father dies when she's around 6 or 7 years old, rather than allowing her to be with her family, she is ordered to go for flowers that my mistress's house might be decorated for an evening party. I spent the day gathering flowers and weaving them into festoons while the dead body of my father was lying within a mile of me. The narrative pinpoints why slaveholders make these demands. He was merely a piece of property, Moreover, they thought he had spoiled his children by teaching them to feel that they were human beings. As narrator, Linda records evidence of Black self affirmation no less than she identifies reactionary white aggression. This dual tracking leads Linda to recognize the hierarchy of home building, whereby all Black households are vulnerable. But those based on blood are sometimes tolerated, while those based on choice are always attacked. When it becomes clear that Dr. Flint will prevent her from marrying a free Black man of her choice, she bids her beau farewell. She confesses, hard as it was to bring my feelings to it, I earnestly entreated him not to come back. I advised him to go to the free states. He left me, still hoping the day would come when I could be bought. With me, the lamp of hope had gone out. The dream of my girlhood was over. When Linda encourages her beau to forget her, she expresses love and affection that white supremacy worked to prevent and attacked when it couldn't prevent it. Linda does not give up on making herself at home, though. She must simply do so under circumstances she does not choose. She reports, I still had my good grandmother and my affectionate brother. When my brother put his arms round my neck and looked into my eyes as if to read there the troubles I dared not tell, I felt that I still had something to love. Even as Linda notes the victory of maintaining and nurturing these bonds, she acknowledges that this modest success would only inspire aggression. If Dr. Flint had known how we loved each other, I think he would have exulted in separating us. As Linda cultivates that which American society would prevent her from enjoying, it is clear that defining and redefining success is an activity that the enslaved take seriously. Because white supremacy so jealously guards intimacies and homes based on romantic love, Linda embraces a domesticity like that of her grandmother, whom she calls Aunt Martha. That is, she embraces a domesticity that does not include a partner of her own choosing. Therefore, when the narrative concludes with Linda emphasizing her children's domestic desires more than her own, it gestures toward a defeat Linda suffered in slavery. Any success she creates after sending her beau away must be fashioned not only from meager resources, but also out of the remnants of crushed dreams. After all, she does not completely choose the father of her children, nor does she actually choose to have children at all. Her predicament therefore highlights the poignancy of Anna Julia Cooper's 1893 pronouncement about the deepest desires of enslaved women. Cooper explains the painful, patient, and silent toil of mothers to gain a fee simple titled to the bodies of their daughters, the despairing fight as of an entrapped tigress to keep hallowed their own persons, would furnish material for epics. Jacob's narrative and the transformation Linda's homemaking desires undergo highlights the importance of the order in which Cooper lists Black women's struggles. Working to claim a title on her daughter's body becomes the preoccupation because it is likely the realm of most possibility. Her daughter's very existence is so often the result of not being able to dictate what happens to her own body. So shielding her daughter from a similar plight feels more urgent and more hopeful. Linda's experience has followed this pattern, so it anticipates Cooper's 1893 description of the painful epics in which enslaved women are forced to become heroines. In this light, the story Incidents relates about an unnamed enslaved woman proves significant. When her mistress prepares to marry and offers to free the family because she expects to have less control of the plantation, the enslaved woman declines. Linda says she had not been surprised by this response because I had often seen them in their comfortable home and thought that the whole town did not contain a happier family. They decline freedom because the mistress had always been their best friend, and they could not be so happy anywhere as with her. Jacob's text thereby demonstrates that there is no one definition of achievement. Even among the enslaved, success and manumission are not always considered synonyms. Linda, as narrator, tells the family story this way. The kind hearted white woman who owned them was an orphan and inherited as slaves a woman and her 6 children. Their father was a free man. They had a comfortable home of their own, parents and children living together. The mother and eldest daughter served their mistress during the day and at night returned to their dwelling, which was on the premises. The young lady was very pious, and there was some reality in her religion. She taught her slaves to lead pure lives and wished them to enjoy the fruit of their own industry. Her religion was not a garb put on for Sunday and laid aside till Sunday returned again. The eldest daughter of the slave mother was promised in marriage to a free man. And the day before the wedding, this good mistress emancipated her in order that her marriage might have the sanction of law. In essence, when a cabin is a home of one's own, its being a slave cabin is less important. However, when the woman's new husband arrives, he asserts his patriarchal rights. He refuses to allow the women to serve during the day and retire to their cabin at night because that would interfere with his sexual power over them. This is clearly what most mattered, given the fate of the woman's remaining daughters. One little girl, too young to be of service to her master, was left with the wretched mother. The other 3 were carried to the master's plantation. The eldest soon became a mother, and when the slaveholder's wife looked at the babe, she wept bitterly. She knew that her own husband had violated the purity she had so carefully inculcated. She had a second child by her master, and then he sold her and his offspring to his brother. She bore 2 children to the brother and was sold again. The next sister went crazy. The life she was compelled to lead drove her mad. The third one became the mother of 5 daughters. The unnamed woman had had no objection to inhabiting a slave cabin because it had been inviolate, but conditions changed with the new owner's arrival. Of course, what makes her situation unusual is that her domestic success had been respected for so long. The moment know your place aggression emerges, her experience becomes typical. Most bondswomen could not protect their own bodies as this woman had. So Linda seems to include this unusual story to reconcile herself to declaring that her children's well being is a higher priority than her own. It's too late for her, just as it was for Aunt Martha. Linda therefore extracts a sense of purpose from her ability to redefine success in ways that prioritize a domestic configuration that oppressors find less valuable because it's based on blood, not based on choice. That is, she is forced to value a home built on blood relations Indeed, reproduction that benefits white people only because it occupies a lower position in society's hierarchy of home building. Nevertheless, she finds a way to make the power structure's constraints accommodate some sense of victory. Clearly, having been able to enjoy an inviolate home life with a free husband means less when one's daughters end up sexually violated. But what are the chances that Linda would have enjoyed a home based on her own romantic love choice only to see her children exploited later? Using another woman's story to put that slim possibility into the community conversation, Jacobs justifies Linda's decision to relinquish her original definition of domestic success. Even while enslaved, Linda is always pursuing accomplishment. Those considered white use their power against her, but she is always pursuing accomplishment. That exact dynamic can be observed throughout African American cultural production. Black people often change their definitions of achievement, but they remain steadfast in their preoccupation with it. Scholarship must begin recognizing this pattern because it has consistently shaped the words and deeds that constitute African American culture. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mitchell, for that really fantastic lecture. We have time for questions and answers. So if you have not yet submitted a question in the webinar Q&A box, please feel free to do so. I'd like to begin with the first question that we received, which is a question about queer intimacy. And the person in the audience asks, how does queer intimacy link to homemade citizenship?
Excellent. Yeah, that's a really important question for me in so many ways. What I'm most invested in this study is the way that these canonical texts by African American women seem to privilege heteronormative nuclear families. And what I have learned by paying attention to the choices they're making is that they are invested in having us appreciate the violence that comes our way because we are succeeding, because we are conforming. So often we understand the violence against LGBT people because we understand that being targeted for not conforming in some way is what this country is all about. We have gotten less well versed, I think, in recognizing the extent to which conforming and succeeding in the ways the country claims to respect, those are actually equally that will equally get you targeted. And these canonical works are invested in showing us that. They're invested in showing the violence that is built into US citizenship because they want us to see that US citizenship is recognized not based on behavior at all, but based on demographic. That you have these heteronormative nuclear families that are Black and brown, but the country over and over again makes sure that Black and brown families are completely missing from the nation's family portrait. And so I think that that's the reason why canonical works by Black women so often privilege the heteronormative nuclear family, because they want to expose the violence there. And I guess the last thing I'll say about that is the reason why this question of queer intimacies is so important to me is because what I understand so clearly is that so many African Americans understand that having a heteronormative nuclear family doesn't make you more worthy of belonging, and being straight doesn't make you more worthy of belonging. But this country lies and says it does. And so these canonical texts are really interested in exposing the violence of that lie.
Thank you so much. And, I was reading your introduction earlier this afternoon as I saw news coming in about President Trump's remarks today in response to the 1619 Project and establishing a 1776 commission. And I was struck in hearing you invoke the year 1619 in your opening remarks and land acknowledgement in combination with what you've just said and what you write about in your introduction about the nuclear family, because the president invoked that very idea as the kind of foundation of what it means to be an American. And he says about the Smithsonian Institution that the document alleged the concepts such as hard work, rational thinking, the nuclear family, and belief in God were not values that unite all Americans, but were instead aspects of whiteness. So I'm wondering what you think about this move, which feels like an act of know your place aggression directed at the Black journalists who created the 1619 Project, but is really invoking a lot of the rhetoric that you are analyzing in your project.
Okay, I don't think I followed that. So you're telling me that Trump said that this was whiteness?
So I'm sorry to have not framed that clearly. He was saying that the Smithsonian Institution was saying that these were aspects associated with whiteness, but that these ideals are for everyone.
I apologize. I don't know what Trump said, so I think I'm not picking up on what is coming from him versus what's coming from the Smithsonian.
Sure. We can move on from there. Just an observation that I was making in response to hearing really the resonances of your project in our moment. I'm going to move on to questions that are coming in from the audience. So thank you.
Sorry, I couldn't follow you, hun.
No, not your fault at all. We do have a question from an audience member asking about the topic of Afro-pessimism, and the audience member is curious to know what you think about the notion of Afro-pessimism in relation to your project.
Ooh, okay, Afro-pessimism. Afro-pessimism is something I address in the introduction because it is an important intellectual configuration, I'll call it. There are so many different kinds of projects that people associate with Afro-pessimism, and sometimes the authors of those projects don't necessarily take the label on themselves. So I acknowledge that it is a really capacious term. But what I say is that the gesture that I'm calling Afro-pessimism is important to the work that I'm doing, in that it grants too much credit to white supremacy. So what I'm interested in is, moves like putting Black being under erasure as an Afro-pessimist move that's trying to think about how continental philosophy, for example, basically erases Black being. And what I'm interested in doing in this project is saying, okay, it's absolutely the case that anti-Blackness, saturates our society. As Christina Sharp puts it, anti-Blackness is the weather. And what I'm interested in doing is saying, absolutely, I see that anti-Blackness is the weather, but let's step back and recognize why it became the weather. It became the weather because of Black success. And so anti-Blackness jumps in to squash every bit of success that Black people have. And I mean small measures of success, right? Even the idea that you are human, holding on to the idea that you are human and not simply chattel, is a success that white supremacy does not leave unchecked. It springs into action. So part of what, I guess, kind of a nice, neat way for me to answer the question about Afro-pessimism is to say that I am invested in this project and having us grapple with the degree to which we speak in terms of anti-Blackness, but then we act as if Black people are the ones reacting. If it's anti-Blackness, then I'm primary, and it's white supremacy that is reacting. And so that to me is the gesture that Afro-pessimism, I haven't seen Afro-pessimism able to do. It doesn't make white supremacy quite as reactionary and secondary as white supremacy's reactionary nature shows it is. White supremacy knows it's not superior. It knows it's not dominant, and it springs into action every time it's reminded that it's not dominant. And to my mind, Afro-pessimism doesn't quite get us to that place. And that is what I'm hoping this project does for people. Thank you for the question.
The next question that we have here is, how do passing narratives fit into the idea of homemade citizenship?
Y'all are bringing it. Okay. Passing narratives. How do passing narratives fit into homemade citizenship? I mean, that's also such a broad question. I mean, when I think of passing narratives, well, okay, so one example, well, how do passing narratives fit into homemade citizenship? In some ways, maybe they don't. I'm thinking about Allison Hobbs' important book on passing. And I'm not going to remember the name of the book, but the author is Allison Hobbs. She's a professor at Stanford, and her book was really important. And part of what it showed was the way that part of what passing does is highlight what Black people leave behind when they pass. So one of the ways that this comes into the study, okay, so let me correct myself. It does come into the study. One of the ways it comes into my study is through Iola Leroy, which I look at in chapter 2 by Frances Harper. And I would say that part of what Iola Leroy does, because Iola, the title character, is, she looks white. She doesn't know that she has African blood until her father passes away. And that's when they discovered that her mother had been his property. And so instantly, even though she looks white, she is instantly now chattel. And for the rest of the novel, basically spends the rest of the novel trying not to be raped, because once you supposedly have this Black blood, then you can be used in any way. And so part of what I think Iola Leroy does is she shows us this investment in not passing, because what she would give up by passing is much more important to her than what she would gain by operating as a white woman. So it's very clear to her that being white in the United States comes with incredible benefits that cannot be denied. But she is much more invested in connecting to her mother and staying connected to her people. And so passing would cut her off from that. And so that's why she turns down the first wedding proposal she has from Dr. Gresham, a Northern guy who's, supposedly good and liberal and all of those beautiful things. And she's just like, yeah, you don't even realize what you would be asking me to give up. So I guess it relates to Allison Hobbs' work because it makes so clear that passing and getting the benefits of whiteness requires you to lose something that Iola is not interested in losing, which is a connection to her mother and to her people and to working on behalf of her people. So that's one of the ways that passing comes up in the book. And I'm sure there are other examples, but I'm blanking right now. I'm thinking about, okay, let me let that go.
This next question actually is both about the framing of the book as you were discussing it today, but also your last chapter on Michelle Obama. And the listener asks about how and if, or how does, or if it does, the transphobic rumors of Michelle Obama or about Michelle Obama being a man interact with ideas presented here in your work?
Oh, that's good. That's so good. Okay. Listen. Okay, wait. Let me group my thoughts here because there's so much to say on this. Misgendering Black women, especially dark-skinned Black women, is know your place aggression. It is a form of reminding you of your proper place, that you will never be what this country puts on a pedestal as ideal womanhood. So misgendering Michelle Obama is part and parcel of that. And what's striking to me about this issue is that I know that, right? I know that Black success brings aggression. I know that. And nevertheless, when I wrote a piece for CNN about Michelle Obama's most admired status, this was in January, I guess, of 2000, I don't know. Anyway, it was when she beat out Hillary Clinton as the most admired woman of the United States. And when I wrote that piece explaining how that was, I nevertheless was shocked at the way that my mentions on Twitter suddenly had all of these masculinized images of Michelle Obama. So it is absolutely the case that that is a form of aggression that tries to say, know your proper place. You will never be what this country says is good and pure and beautiful. But I also have to say here and take this as an opportunity to underscore why I'm so invested in understanding that even the most conservative looking texts that are holding up the heteronormative nuclear family, even those texts are highlighting for us the violence of know your place aggression, the violence of it's not about your behavior, it's about your demographic. So I can be as perfect as I want, and I'm still going to be brutalized and attacked. Even those most conservative examples are aware of how being the model of heteronormativity doesn't make you any better, right? And they understand that. And the misgendering of Michelle Obama is another way of understanding that Black people in general know that being the subject, being the perfectly behaved subject that the country claims it will respect, will never save you. And so this is the reason why I am so invested in us understanding the importance of fighting for LGBTQ rights. Anyone who knows my work knows how much I work in all of those arenas because I understand that being read as heterosexual does not make you more deserving of belonging. I know that. And part of the way I know that, so yes, I'm not going to let myself get on too many tangents with this. It's a really important question. And again, to my mind, it is at the heart of what homemade citizenship is, which is to say, homemade citizenship is pursuing success and belonging, knowing that you will be attacked for doing so. And there is no better example of that, to my mind, than trans individuals, than LGBTQ individuals. They are perfect examples of how pursuing your own success, you do it despite knowing that you will be attacked for that success, of knowing that you belong, knowing that you deserve rights. That is part of what will get you attacked, is your success. So yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Our next question is our last question, which I hope will give you a chance to shine as the literary and performance studies scholar that you are. And this question is a question about genre. And the attendee is asking about how the dynamics of redefining success shift across genres. Do you see major differences in how these authors can highlight the dynamics of know your place aggression in novels versus plays versus science fiction, the many genres that you cover in your book?
Interesting question. I actually think that homemade citizenship and know your place aggression remain incredibly consistent across genre. I think that reading through the lens of success will end up showing us just how consistently success is at the heart of what's going on. And so part of the reason why looking at different genres is important to me is just to make sure that we can appreciate just how widespread that debate and redefining of success has been throughout Black cultural production. So in the book, I mostly look at narrative because I think that that has been a way of intervening in our understanding of African American literary production most broadly. Like, you know, people who pay attention to narrative sometimes will ignore drama and ignore poetry, but they always pay attention to narrative. And so the book enters into that broad conversation by looking at narrative primarily, but I made sure to bring in drama because it's not often looked at. Poetry less so, but I bring that in sometimes too. And then, of course, your point is well taken in terms of performance, because I try throughout the study to make sure that we're thinking about performance as dynamically as possible and understanding that even novels are part of a dynamic conversation that isn't just limited to words. And so I try to remain alive to its dynamism, even when I'm looking at narrative, which has been so privileged in these conversations. So again, I think that know your place aggression and defining and redefining success is the most consistent thing ever. And we can look at every single genre and find evidence of it.
Well, thank you. That answer and your work in general are evidence of how wide ranging the humanities can be as a place of inquiry and as a mode of inquiry, and the importance to our contemporary society. So, on behalf of everyone at the Humanities Collective and here at Trinity University, I want to thank you so much for joining us and for this really wonderful lecture. Thank you, all of you who are watching at home. I hope that you'll share this video and follow us on social media. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, everybody, for allowing me to share these ideas.
Thanks so much.